Jack Thompson stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse suite, gazing out at the New York City skyline. The view was breathtaking, a testament to his success in the real estate industry. Yet, as he surveyed the city he had helped shape, he felt nothing but emptiness. The room behind him was a shrine to his achievements. Awards lined the shelves, their polished surfaces reflecting the soft light. Framed magazine covers featuring his face adorned the walls. Each object screamed success. But to Jack, they were just reminders of how hollow his life had become. He turned away from the window, his expensive shoes echoing on the marble floor as he walked to his desk. A photograph caught his eye, a younger version of himself, smiling broadly at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. He barely recognized that man now. Impulsively, Jack grabbed his coat and headed out. He needed to escape the suffocating opulence of his home. As he rode the elevator down, he made a split-second decision to visit a homeless shelter in the Lower East Side. He had donated to it before, but had never actually set foot inside. The shelter was a stark contrast to Jack's world. The walls were bare and utilitarian, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and desperation. As he walked through the corridors, Jack felt increasingly out of place in his tailored suit. That's when he saw Mike. The man was sitting alone in a corner, his weathered face buried in a tattered book. Something about Mike's demeanor caught Jack's attention. There was a dignity in the way he held himself, despite his ragged appearance. Jack approached Mike, introducing himself. As they talked, Jack learned that Mike had once been a university professor before a series of unfortunate events left him on the streets. The more they spoke, the more Jack saw in Mike everything he feared becoming: alone, forgotten, stripped of all the trappings of success. In that moment, Jack felt an overwhelming need to help. He pulled out his checkbook and, with slightly trembling hands, wrote out a check for $100,000. When he handed it to Mike, the man's eyes widened in disbelief. Mike stared at the check, then back at Jack. His voice was thick with emotion when he finally spoke. "Why?" he asked simply. Jack struggled to articulate his reasons. Was it guilt? Fear? A desperate attempt to connect with another human being? In the end, he simply shrugged. "Because you need it, and I can give it," he said. Mike's fingers closed around the check, but his expression remained skeptical. He had seen too much of the world's cruelty to trust easily. "Thank you," he said cautiously. "But what's the catch?" "No catch," Jack replied, suddenly feeling uncomfortable under Mike's scrutiny. "It's yours to use as you see fit." As Jack left the shelter, he felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. He had done a good deed, hadn't he? Then why did he feel so unsettled? The city streets, usually so familiar, now seemed alien and hostile. He hurried back to his penthouse, seeking refuge in its familiar luxury. But as he stood once again at his window, looking out at the city, Jack realized that something had fundamentally changed. The act of giving, of connecting with another human being, had cracked open a part of himself he had long kept sealed. And now, he wasn't sure he could close it again. The following morning, Jack awoke to find himself in an unexpected emotional state. Tears streamed down his face as he sat on the edge of his king-sized bed, surrounded by the trappings of his wealth. The emptiness that had been gnawing at him for years now felt overwhelming. Memories of his childhood, long suppressed, began to surface. He remembered the cold, echoing halls of his family's mansion, the constant absence of his parents, and the crushing loneliness that had been his constant companion. These recollections, once safely locked away, now flooded his mind with startling clarity. As he moved through his morning routine, every luxurious item in his home seemed to mock him. The Italian marble countertops, the designer suits hanging in his closet, the rare artwork adorning his walls. All of it felt meaningless in the face of his emotional turmoil. Meanwhile, across the city, Mike was facing his own challenges. With Jack's check safely deposited, he decided to buy some decent clothes and proper food. But as he entered a high-end grocery store, he was met with suspicious glances and outright stares. Mike felt the weight of judgment as he moved through the aisles. His new clothes, while clean and presentable, couldn't hide years of rough living. As he reached for organic produce and gourmet items, he could hear the whispers and see the sideways glances from other shoppers. At the checkout, the cashier eyed him warily, as if expecting trouble. Mike felt a surge of anger and shame. Remembering the respect he once commanded as a university professor, he paid for his items and left quickly, the bag of groceries feeling like a burning reminder of how far he had fallen. As he walked back to the shelter, Mike's mind drifted to his days in academia. He remembered the excitement of engaging with students, the satisfaction of publishing research, and the sense of purpose that had defined his life. The contrast with his current situation was stark and painful. Back in his penthouse, Jack was grappling with a new development. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. As he read it, his blood ran cold. The message contained details about his past that he had never shared with anyone, about his parents' abandonment, about the loneliness of his childhood. More messages followed, each revealing another painful secret from Jack's past. He tried to ignore them, throwing himself into work, scheduling meetings, and making calls, but the words on his phone screen haunted him, forcing him to confront memories he had long buried. As the day wore on, Jack found himself unable to focus on anything but the mysterious messages. Who could be sending them? How did they know these things about him? The more he thought about it, the more paranoid he became. By nightfall, both Jack and Mike were grappling with their own forms of isolation. Jack, surrounded by wealth but haunted by his past, and Mike, struggling to reintegrate into a society that seemed determined to keep him on the margins. As they lay in their respective beds, Jack in his luxurious penthouse and Mike on his shelter cot, both men felt the weight of their histories pressing down on them. The $100,000 donation, which had seemed like such a clear-cut act of kindness, had set in motion a series of events that would force both men to confront their deepest fears and longings. The city slept, but for Jack and Mike, the night was filled with restless thoughts and uneasy dreams, as they each wondered what the coming days would bring. As the sun rose over New York City, Mike awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The $100,000 donation from Jack had given him more than just financial security. It had reignited a spark of hope he thought he'd lost forever. After careful consideration, Mike decided to use a portion of the money to start a small, healthy food business. His vision was clear. He wanted to create a place that would not only serve nutritious meals, but also provide opportunities for other homeless individuals. Mike remembered the countless times he'd struggled to find affordable, healthy food while living on the streets. Now, he had a chance to change that for others. Mike spent days researching, planning, and seeking advice from local business owners who were willing to help. He found a small, run-down storefront in a bustling neighborhood and began the process of transforming it into his dream. The work was hard, but for the first time in years, Mike felt alive with purpose. Meanwhile, across town, Jack Thompson was facing his own challenges. At the urging of his assistant, who had noticed his increasingly erratic behavior, Jack reluctantly agreed to see a therapist. Dr. Sarah Linden was known for her work with high-profile clients, and Jack hoped she could help him make sense of the turmoil he was experiencing. In their first session, Jack sat stiffly on the leather couch, avoiding eye contact with Dr. Linden. The room, with its muted colors and soft lighting, was designed to be calming, but Jack felt anything but calm. As Sarah gently probed, Jack found himself revealing things he'd never spoken aloud before. "I've always been alone," Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Even when I was a kid, surrounded by nannies and staff, I was alone. My parents. They were always too busy, too important to bother with me. Sarah listened attentively, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question. As the session progressed, Jack began to explore the deep-seated insecurities that had driven him to amass his fortune. He spoke of his fear of ending up like the homeless people he often saw on the streets, of his desperate need to prove his worth through material success. In subsequent sessions, Jack delved deeper into his past. He spoke of the promise he'd made to himself as a young man, that he would never become like his parents, never prioritize wealth and status over human connection. Yet, as he reflected on his life, he realized with a sinking feeling that he had become exactly what he'd feared. "I've achieved everything I thought I wanted," Jack said during one particularly emotional session. "I'm one of the richest men in New York. I've built skyscrapers, changed the city's skyline. But what's it all for? I feel empty, lost." Sarah listened compassionately, but challenged Jack to think about what truly mattered to him. "You've spent your life running from your past and toward a vision of success that was never really yours," she observed. "What would it look like to live a life aligned with your values, Jack?" This question haunted Jack long after the session ended. He found himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, trying to imagine a life driven by something other than the accumulation of wealth and accolades. As the weeks passed, both Mike and Jack continued on their respective journeys of self-discovery and growth. Mike's small business began to take shape, with each passing day bringing him closer to his goal of creating a space of hope and sustenance for those in need. Jack, through his therapy sessions, started to confront the pain of his past and the emptiness of his present. It was a difficult and often painful process, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving towards something meaningful, even if he wasn't quite sure what that something was yet. The paths of these two men, so different, yet connected by a single act of generosity, were about to intersect again in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The day of Mike's business opening arrived, filled with a mix of excitement and nervous energy. He had named his venture Hope in Every Plate, a testament to his vision of providing not just food, but also dignity and opportunity to those in need. The small storefront had been transformed into a welcoming space with warm colors and secondhand furniture arranged to create a homey atmosphere. Mike had spent the previous week spreading the word among the homeless community, inviting them to the opening event. As the doors opened, a diverse group of people began to filter in. Some dressed in worn clothes, others in donated business attire, all sharing a look of cautious optimism. The air filled with the aroma of freshly prepared food, as Mike and his small team of volunteers, all formerly homeless themselves, bustled about serving healthy, affordable meals. The menu was simple but nutritious, featuring dishes made from donated ingredients from local markets and farms. As the event progressed, the initial tension in the room began to dissipate. People started to relax, to talk and laugh with one another. Mike moved from table to table, greeting everyone, listening to their stories, and sharing his own journey from professor to homeless to business owner. Meanwhile, across town, Jack Thompson was battling with himself. He had received an invitation to Mike's opening event. News of his donation had spread, and Mike had felt compelled to include him. Jack had been avoiding any further contact, uncomfortable with the emotions stirred up by their initial encounter. But something about Mike's story and the promise of this new venture tugged at him. After hours of internal debate, Jack made a decision. He needed to see this through, to witness the results of his impulsive act of generosity. More than that, he felt a desperate need to reconnect with the humanity he'd lost touch with over the years. Jack arrived at Hope in Every Plate, just as the event was in full swing. As he stepped through the door, the noise and warmth of the crowded space washed over him. He felt immediately out of place in his expensive suit, acutely aware of the stark contrast between himself and the other attendees. Mike spotted Jack from across the room, surprise evident on his face. He made his way over, navigating through the crowd. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I didn't expect you to come." Jack shook Mike's hand, feeling a mix of discomfort and something else he couldn't quite name. I wanted to see how things turned out," he said awkwardly. As Mike began to show Jack around, explaining the concept behind hope in every plate, Jack found himself drawn into conversation with some of the other attendees. He listened to their stories, tales of job loss, medical bankruptcies, and unexpected tragedies that had left them on the streets. For the first time in years, Jack felt something stir within him, a sense of connection, of shared humanity. The event continued late into the evening. As things began to wind down, Mike took center stage to make a speech. He spoke of resilience, of the importance of community, and of the power of second chances. His words resonated deeply with everyone in the room, including Jack. As Mike finished speaking, he caught Jack's eye and nodded, silently acknowledging the role Jack's donation had played in making this possible. In that moment, Jack felt a surge of emotion he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of having contributed to something genuinely meaningful. The evening drew to a close, but neither Mike nor Jack was ready for it to end. They found themselves lingering, helping to clean up, both sensing that this encounter was significant in ways they didn't yet fully understand. As they said goodbye, there was an unspoken agreement that this wouldn't be the last time they saw each other. Both men left that night changed. Mike with a renewed sense of purpose and hope, and Jack with the first stirrings of a realization that perhaps there was more to life than the pursuit of wealth and power. The seeds of an unlikely friendship had been planted, one that would challenge and change both men in ways they could never have anticipated. As the cleanup from the opening event of Hope in Every Plate neared completion, Mike found himself standing at the center of the room, surrounded by the warmth and positive energy that still lingered in the air. The last few stragglers were helping to stack chairs and wipe down tables, their faces reflecting a mix of contentment and renewed hope. Mike cleared his throat, drawing the attention of those still present. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'd like to say a few words before we close up for the night." The small crowd gathered around, their faces expectant. Jack, who had been helping to clean up in an uncharacteristic display of humility, stood at the back, trying to blend in despite his expensive attire. "A few months ago," Mike continued, "I was sitting on a street corner, wondering if I'd ever find my way back. I'd lost everything, my job, my home, my sense of purpose. But standing here tonight, I'm reminded that it's never too late for a new beginning." He paused, looking around at the faces before him. This place, Hope in Every Plate, isn't just about serving food. It's about serving hope. It's about reminding each other that we all have value, that we all deserve a chance to rebuild our lives. Mike's words resonated deeply with his audience. Many nodded in agreement. Some wiped away tears. "But I couldn't have done this alone," he added. "It took the kindness of a stranger, the support of this community, and the belief that we are all capable of change." As Mike spoke about the power of connection and the importance of seeing the humanity in every person, regardless of their circumstances, Jack felt a lump form in his throat. The words struck a chord deep within him, echoing the emptiness he'd been feeling in his own life. Suddenly, overcome by an emotion he couldn't quite name, Jack found himself moving forward. Before he knew what he was doing, he was standing beside Mike, facing the crowd. "If I may," Jack said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Mike nodded, stepping aside to give him space. Jack looked out at the faces before him, so different from the boardrooms and luxury galas he was accustomed to. I'm not good at this," he began awkwardly. But listening to Mike, I realized something. I've spent my entire life building walls, literal skyscrapers and figurative barriers to keep people out. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I thought success meant having the most money, the biggest buildings, but standing here tonight, I'm realizing that true success is about connection. It's about making a difference in someone's life. Jack's voice cracked slightly as he continued. I came here tonight thinking I was just checking on an investment. Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was missing. A sense of purpose, a reminder of our shared humanity. As Jack spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial wariness some had felt towards this obviously wealthy outsider melted away, replaced by a sense of shared vulnerability and understanding. Mike watched Jack with a mix of surprise and admiration. He saw the mask of the billionaire businessman slip away, revealing a man grappling with his own pain and searching for meaning. When Jack finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It wasn't the polite, restrained clapping of a corporate event, but the warm, genuine appreciation of a community acknowledging a shared moment of truth. As the applause died down, people began to approach Jack and Mike, sharing their own stories and expressing their gratitude. The boundaries between helper and helped, rich and poor, began to blur. In that moment, they were simply human beings, each carrying their own burdens, each seeking connection and purpose. The event, which had been winding down, found new energy. People lingered, talking in small groups, exchanging contact information, and making plans to support each other. The small restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It was a hub of hope and human connection. As the night finally came to a close, Mike and Jack found themselves standing side by side, watching the last of the guests depart. Both men felt profoundly changed by the events of the evening, though neither could have fully articulated how. They had each taken a step towards bridging the vast gulf that separated their worlds, and in doing so, had begun to heal parts of themselves they hadn't even known were broken. In the weeks following the opening of Hope in Every Plate, Jack and Mike's unlikely friendship began to take root. They started meeting regularly, sometimes at the restaurant, other times at a quiet cafe near Jack's office. Their conversations ranged from lighthearted banter to deep discussions about life, purpose, and the nature of success. For Jack, these meetings became a lifeline, a connection to a world he had long isolated himself from. He found himself opening up to Mike in ways he never had with anyone else, sharing stories of his lonely childhood and the driving force behind his relentless pursuit of wealth. I always thought if I just had enough money, enough power, I'd finally feel secure, Jack confessed during one of their talks. But now, I'm at the top, and I've never felt more alone. Mike listened with empathy, offering insights from his own journey. Sometimes, Jack, we have to lose everything to find what really matters, he said gently. As their friendship deepened, Jack continued his therapy sessions with Sarah. He found himself more willing to confront his past, to explore the pain he'd been running from for so long. In one particularly breakthrough session, Jack realized the extent to which he'd pushed away his family. I haven't spoken to my sister in years, he admitted to Sarah, the weight of this revelation heavy in his voice. I was so angry at our parents, I cut off everyone associated with that part of my life. Sarah encouraged Jack to consider reconnecting with his family. Healing often requires us to face the very things we've been avoiding, she pointed out. Inspired by his conversations with Mike and his progress in therapy, Jack made the difficult decision to reach out to his estranged family. He started with a simple email to his sister, Sarah, apologizing for the years of silence and expressing a desire to reconnect. The response didn't come immediately, and Jack found himself checking his email obsessively, a mix of hope and fear churning in his stomach. When Sarah's reply finally arrived, it was cautious but open to the possibility of reconciliation. Meanwhile, Mike was facing his own challenges and triumphs. Hope in every plate was growing, attracting not just those in need of a meal, but also volunteers from the community eager to help. Mike found himself in the role of mentor, guiding former homeless individuals as they learned new skills and rebuilt their lives. One afternoon, a young woman named Lisa approached Mike after her shift. "I never thought I'd be able to hold down a job again," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "But you gave me a chance when no one else would." Moments like these reinforced Mike's sense of purpose. He was creating more than just a restaurant. He was building a community of support and second chances. Jack, inspired by Mike's work, began to use his business connections to support hope in every plate. He introduced Mike to potential donors, helped navigate bureaucratic hurdles, and even rolled up his sleeves to help out during busy shifts. As Jack immersed himself in this new world, he found the emptiness that had plagued him for so long beginning to recede. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of something meaningful, something larger than himself. One evening, as they were closing up the restaurant, Mike turned to Jack with a smile. "You know, when you handed me that check months ago, I never imagined we'd end up here," he said. Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Neither did I," he replied softly, "but I'm grateful we did." As they locked up and stepped out into the cool night air, both men felt a sense of contentment. They had each come a long way from where they started, Mike from the streets, Jack from his isolated tower of wealth. And though they still had a long journey ahead, they were no longer walking alone. The city bustled around them, a symphony of lights and sounds. But for Jack and Mike, the most important thing was the connection they had forged, a friendship that was helping them both rediscover the true value of human connection. As summer turned to fall, Jack's journey of self-discovery and reconnection continued to unfold. Inspired by his experiences with Mike and hope in every plate, Jack decided to organize a community event that would bring together people from all walks of life. He envisioned a day of dialogue, shared meals, and activities aimed at fostering understanding and breaking down social barriers. Jack approached Mike with the idea, his eyes alight with excitement. "I want you to be the guest of honor," he said. "Your story, your journey, it's exactly what people need to hear." Mike was hesitant at first, uncomfortable with being in the spotlight, but Jack's enthusiasm was contagious, and he eventually agreed. Together, they began planning the event, reaching out to local organizations, securing a venue, and crafting a program that would encourage open and honest conversations about inclusion and solidarity. As the preparations for the event were in full swing, Jack received an unexpected phone call. It was his sister Sarah, her voice tinged with worry. "Jack, it's Mom," she said. "She's in the hospital. The doctors say it doesn't look good." The news hit Jack like a physical blow. Despite the years of estrangement, the thought of losing his mother before he had a chance to make amends was devastating. He found himself torn between his commitment to the community event and the pull of family obligations he had long ignored. Mike, seeing Jack's distress, encouraged him to go to his mother. "Family is important, Jack," he said gently. "This might be your last chance to make things right." With a heavy heart, Jack decided to visit his mother. As he packed a small suitcase, memories of his childhood flooded back. Moments of warmth amidst the cold neglect, fleeting instances of connection that he had buried beneath years of resentment. The hospital was a stark, sterile environment that made Jack's skin crawl. As he approached his mother's room, he felt a mix of anxiety and long-suppressed longing. When he finally saw her, lying small and fragile in the hospital bed, Jack was struck by how much she had aged. Their initial interaction was awkward and tense. Years of unspoken hurt and misunderstanding hung between them like a heavy curtain. But as the hours passed, Small cracks began to appear in the walls they had built. "I'm sorry, Jack," his mother said at one point, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were doing what was best for you, giving you every advantage. But we forgot to give you what you needed most, our time, our love." Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm sorry too, Mom," he replied, taking her frail hand in his. "I was so angry for so long, I couldn't see that you were doing your best." As they talked, Jack began to see his parents in a new light. They weren't the cold, uncaring figures of his memory, but flawed human beings who had made mistakes. It didn't erase the pain of his childhood, but it opened the door to forgiveness and understanding. Over the next few days, Jack split his time between the hospital and helping Mike with the final preparations for the community event. He found himself opening up to Mike about his family history, sharing stories he had never told anyone before. "It's strange," Jack mused one evening as they went over the event details. "A few months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. Now, I feel like I'm rediscovering who I am, who my family is." Mike nodded, understanding. "That's the thing about connections, Jack. They have a way of showing us parts of ourselves we never knew existed." As the day of the event drew near, Jack felt a mix of emotions. He was excited about the potential for positive change, anxious about speaking publicly about his personal journey, and conflicted about being away from his mother. But with Mike's support and the newfound strength he had discovered within himself, Jack was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The stage was set for a day that would challenge perceptions, build bridges, and remind everyone involved of the fundamental value of human connection. As Jack made his final preparations, he couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come from the isolated, emptiness-filled existence he had been living just a few months earlier. The community event organized by Jack and Mike was a resounding success. The venue buzzed with energy as people from all walks of life came together to share stories, break bread, and engage in meaningful dialogue. Jack's opening speech, in which he candidly shared his journey from isolated billionaire to community advocate, set the tone for a day of honest and often emotional exchanges. Mike's presentation was the highlight of the event. He spoke eloquently about his experiences on the streets, the challenges of rebuilding a life from scratch, and the transformative power of human kindness. His words resonated deeply with the audience, drawing tears and standing ovations. As the event wound down, Jack felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. However, his moment of triumph was short-lived. As he was saying goodbye to the last of the attendees, his phone buzzed with another anonymous message. This one was more disturbing than the previous ones, hinting at dark secrets from his childhood that he had long suppressed. Jack's hand trembled as he read the message. Fragments of memories he had buried deep in his subconscious began to surface. Whispered conversations overheard as a child, hushed arguments between his parents, and a pervasive sense of unease that had colored his early years. Overwhelmed by the flood of emotions, Jack retreated to a quiet corner. Mike, noticing his friend's distress, approached cautiously. "Jack, what's wrong?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Jack hesitated, then showed Mike the message. "I've been receiving these for weeks," he admitted. "At first, I thought it was just someone trying to blackmail me, but now, I'm starting to think there's more to my childhood than I remember." Mike listened patiently as Jack poured out his fears and confusion. "Whatever this is, Jack, you don't have to face it alone," he reassured his friend. Meanwhile, Mike was facing challenges of his own. The success of Hope in Every Plate had not gone unnoticed, and not all the attention was positive. A former colleague from Mike's university days, Dr. Robert Chen, had begun a smear campaign against him. Chen, bitter about his own fall from academic grace, couldn't bear to see Mike's redemption and success. He started spreading rumors about Mike's past, insinuating that he was taking advantage of the homeless community for personal gain. The accusations hit Mike hard, He had worked tirelessly to rebuild his life and create something meaningful, and now it felt like it was all crumbling around him. The local health department, spurred by anonymous complaints, began an investigation into hope in every plate. When Jack learned of Mike's troubles, he immediately sprang into action. He offered to use his legal team to defend Mike and the restaurant. "You've done nothing wrong," Jack insisted. "We're not going to let them tear down everything you've built." As they worked together to gather evidence and prepare their defense, Jack and Mike's friendship deepened further. They spent long nights poring over documents, strategizing, and supporting each other through their respective crises. One evening, as they took a break from their work, Mike turned to Jack with a serious expression. "You know, Jack, whatever these messages are revealing about your past, it doesn't change who you are now. The man I've come to know over these past months, that's the real you." Jack felt a lump form in his throat at Mike's words. "Thank you," he said softly. "I don't know what I would do without your friendship." As the date of the health department hearing approached, both men felt the weight of their challenges bearing down on them. Jack was still grappling with the mysterious messages and the unsettling memories they were unearthing. Mike was fighting to save his business and his reputation. Yet, despite the stress and uncertainty, there was a sense of strength in their shared struggle. They had each other's backs, a stark contrast to the isolation they had both experienced before their paths crossed. The night before the hearing, as they made their final preparations, Jack and Mike took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. From a chance encounter between a billionaire and a homeless man, they had forged a friendship that was now being tested in the crucible of adversity. Whatever the outcome of the hearing, whatever secrets Jack's past held, they knew one thing for certain. They would face it together, bound by a connection that had become the most valuable thing in both their lives. The day of the hearing arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. The small courtroom was packed with supporters of hope in every plate, including many of the people whose lives had been touched by Mike's work. Jack and Mike sat side by side at the defendant's table, their faces set with determination. As the proceedings began, Dr. Chen presented his case against Mike and the restaurant. His accusations were scathing, painting Mike as a fraud who was exploiting the vulnerable for personal gain. The health department representative followed, listing a series of alleged violations based on anonymous tips. Mike listened to the charges with a mix of anger and disbelief. Everything he had worked for, all the lives he had helped change, were being dismissed as an elaborate con. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "I stand before you today not as a perfect man, but as someone who has experienced both the depths of despair and the heights of redemption," Mike began. He went on to share his story, his fall from academia, his time on the streets, and the second chance he had been given. He spoke of the community that had formed around hope in every plate, of the lives that had been transformed. As Mike spoke, the room fell silent. Even those who had come with doubts found themselves moved by the sincerity and passion in his words. When he finished, there was a moment of profound silence before a wave of supportive murmurs swept through the courtroom. Then, unexpectedly, Jack stood up. He hadn't planned to speak, but seeing his friend lay bare, his vulnerabilities had stirred something within him. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing out clearly, "I'd like to say a few words if I may." The judge nodded, and Jack took a deep breath before continuing. "A few months ago, I was a man who thought I had everything. I had wealth, power, success by every conventional measure, but I was empty inside, isolated from the world around me." Jack went on to describe how his encounter with Mike had changed him, how it had opened his eyes to the true meaning of success and the value of human connection. What Mike has created with Hope in Every Plate isn't just a restaurant. It's a beacon of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder of our shared humanity. As Jack spoke, His words seemed to resonate, not just with the judge and the audience, but with something deep within himself. For the first time, he was publicly acknowledging the transformation he had undergone, the journey from isolated billionaire to engaged community member. "I've seen firsthand the impact of Mike's work," Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've witnessed people regain their dignity, find purpose, and rebuild their lives. To suggest that this is some kind of fraud is not just wrong, it's an insult to every person who has found hope and a second chance through this program." Jack's impassioned speech had a visible effect on the courtroom. Even Dr. Chen, who had been smirking throughout the proceedings, looked uncomfortable. The health department representative shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact. When Jack finished speaking, the judge called for a brief recess to consider all the evidence. As they waited for the decision, Mike turned to Jack, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. Jack squeezed his friend's shoulder in response. Whatever the outcome, they both knew that they had spoken their truth, had stood up for something larger than themselves. When the judge returned, her decision was clear. She dismissed all charges against Mike and hope in every plate, citing lack of evidence and the overwhelming positive impact on the community. She also recommended an investigation into the source of the anonymous complaints, strongly implying that they appeared to be motivated by personal vendetta rather than genuine concern. As the judge's gavel fell, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Mike and Jack embraced, both men overwhelmed by the emotions of the moment. They had faced a significant challenge and emerged victorious, their friendship stronger than ever. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by well-wishers and supporters, Mike turned to Jack with a smile. "You know," he said, "when you handed me that check all those months ago, I never imagined it would lead to this." Jack nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Neither did I," he replied, "but I'm grateful it did." As they stood there, basking in the glow of their victory, both men realized that they had found something far more valuable than money or status. They had found a true connection, a friendship that had weathered storms and emerged stronger. And in that connection, they had both found a sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded them for so long. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges. But whatever came next, they knew they would face it together, two unlikely friends united by their shared journey of redemption and discovery. The weeks following the court victory were a whirlwind of activity for both Jack and Mike. Hope in every plate saw a surge in support from the community, with more volunteers and donations pouring in than ever before. The publicity from the hearing had turned Mike into a local hero, his story inspiring others to take action in their own communities. Jack, meanwhile, had been grappling with the mysterious messages about his past. After much soul-searching and encouragement from Mike, he decided it was time to confront the truth head-on. He hired a private investigator to look into his family's history, determined to uncover whatever secrets lay buried in his past. As the investigation progressed, Jack found himself on an emotional roller coaster. Each new piece of information seemed to challenge everything he thought he knew about his childhood and his family. Through it all, Mike remained a steadfast support, offering a listening ear and words of encouragement when Jack felt overwhelmed. Finally, after weeks of anticipation, the investigator presented Jack with his findings. The truth was more shocking than Jack could have imagined. He had a sister he never knew existed. Overwhelmed by this revelation, Jack decided to organize another community event, this time with a more personal agenda. He wanted to use this platform to reveal the truth about his family and hopefully reconnect with his long-lost sister. The day of the event arrived, and the community center was packed to capacity. People from all walks of life had gathered, curious about what Jack Thompson, the billionaire turned community advocate, had to say. Jack took the stage, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the microphone. "I stand before you today not just as a businessman or a philanthropist, but as a man on a journey of discovery," he began. "Over the past few months, I've learned the true value of human connection, thanks in large part to my friend Mike and the amazing work at Hope in Every Plate." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But my journey didn't stop there. Recently, I've been receiving anonymous messages about my past, messages that have forced me to confront truths I never knew existed." A hush fell over the crowd as Jack revealed the shocking truth. "I've discovered that I have a sister I never knew about. She was given up for adoption before I was born, a secret my parents kept their entire lives." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Jack's voice shook with emotion as he continued. "To my sister, if you're out there, if you're listening, I want you to know that I've been searching for you. I want to meet you, to know you, to make up for all the years we've lost." As Jack finished speaking, a commotion arose at the back of the room. A woman stood up, tears streaming down her face. "Jack," she called out, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm here. I'm your sister." The room fell silent as the woman made her way to the stage. Jack stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief and hope. When she reached him, they stood facing each other, seeing their own features mirrored in the other's face. "I'm Sarah," she said softly. "I've been watching you from afar for years, trying to protect myself from the pain of the past. But when I saw how you've changed, how you've opened your heart to others, I knew it was time to reveal myself." Jack and Sarah embraced, years of separation and longing pouring out in that single moment. The audience watched in awe, many wiping away tears at the powerful display of reconciliation and love. Mike, who had been watching from the sidelines, felt his own eyes well up with tears. He knew better than anyone the journey Jack had been on, the transformation he had undergone from a man isolated by wealth to someone willing to be vulnerable in front of the world. As Jack and Sarah pulled apart, Jack beckoned Mike to join them on stage. "None of this would have been possible without Mike," Jack said, his arm around his friend's shoulders. "He showed me the power of human connection, of second chances." Mike, overcome with emotion, addressed the crowd. "What we're witnessing today is the true power of community," he said. "When we open our hearts to others, when we're willing to be vulnerable and authentic, miracles can happen." The event, which had started as a community gathering, had turned into a powerful testament to the transformative power of human connection. As Jack, Sarah, and Mike stood together on stage, they embodied the journey from isolation to connection, from fear to love. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of the community they had helped build, Jack and Mike realized that they had found something far more valuable than any material success. They had found family, not just in blood relations, but in the bonds forged through shared struggles and triumphs. As the event came to a close, the air was filled with a sense of hope and possibility. Jack and Mike knew that their journey was far from over. There would be new challenges to face, new connections to forge, but they were no longer afraid. Together, with their newfound family and community, they were ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that the true value of life lay not in wealth or status, but in the connections we make and the lives we touch along the way. It was a gloomy night in New York City. Rain poured relentlessly, creating a treacherous environment for both pedestrians and drivers. Ethan Miller, a well-known billionaire in his mid-40s, was driving his luxury sedan through the slick streets. His attention was divided between the road and his smartphone, where he was engrossed in reading the latest stock market reports. Ethan's car glided through the dim streets, its wipers working overtime to clear the windshield. The rain created a hazy barrier, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Streetlights reflected off the wet asphalt, creating a disorienting glare. Despite these conditions, Ethan continued to glance at his phone, convinced he could multitask effectively. On the sidewalk, Samantha Johnson clutched her baby tightly to her chest. She was a homeless woman in her late 20s, her clothes worn and damp from the persistent rain. Samantha had been seeking shelter for hours, desperate to find a dry spot for her infant. Seeing a potential refuge across the street, she made a split-second decision to cross, not realizing the danger that awaited. As Samantha stepped off the curb, Ethan's eyes were fixed on his phone. By the time he looked up, it was too late. He saw a blurred figure directly in front of his car. Ethan slammed on the brakes, but the wet road offered no traction. The car skidded forward, the tires screeching against the asphalt. The impact was inevitable. Ethan's car struck Samantha, sending her and her baby tumbling onto the hood before they rolled off onto the wet pavement. The sound of the collision was muffled by the rain, but to Ethan, it was deafening. Time seemed to stand still as he watched in horror, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. For a moment, Ethan sat frozen in his seat, the reality of what had just happened slowly sinking in. Then, adrenaline kicked in. He fumbled with his seatbelt, his hands shaking as he struggled to unfasten it. Finally free, he burst out of the car, the rain immediately soaking through his expensive suit. Ethan rushed to where Samantha lay motionless on the ground, her baby wailing beside her. He knelt down, his pants absorbing the water from the street. Samantha was conscious, but clearly in pain, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The baby, miraculously, appeared unharmed, protected by Samantha's instinctive embrace during the impact. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Ethan stammered, his voice barely audible over the rain and the baby's cries. He reached for his phone, which was still clutched in his hand, and dialed 911. As he waited for the operator to answer, he tried to assess Samantha's condition, but his lack of medical knowledge left him feeling helpless. The ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens piercing through the night. Paramedics quickly took charge of the scene, attending to Samantha and her baby with practiced efficiency. Ethan stood back, watching as they worked, the full weight of his actions beginning to settle on his shoulders. As Samantha was loaded into the ambulance, Ethan made a split-second decision. He approached one of the paramedics and said, "I'm going with them to the hospital." It wasn't a question, but a statement of intent. The paramedic nodded, and Ethan climbed into the ambulance, leaving his car behind on the rain-soaked street. The ride to the hospital was tense and silent, save for the baby's occasional whimpers and the steady beep of medical equipment. Ethan sat with his head in his hands, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily upon him. He knew that this night would change everything, not just for Samantha and her child, but for him as well. As the ambulance raced through the city, Ethan made a silent vow. He would take responsibility for his actions and do whatever it took to make things right. Little did he know, this accident would be the catalyst for a journey that would challenge his perceptions, test his resolve, and ultimately transform not only his life, but the lives of countless others in ways he could never have imagined. The hospital's emergency room bustled with activity as Samantha was rushed in for treatment. Ethan followed, his wet clothes leaving a trail of water on the polished floor. He was directed to a waiting area, where he paced nervously, his mind racing with thoughts of the accident and its consequences. After what seemed like hours, a doctor approached Ethan. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, her face neutral. Ethan nodded, bracing himself for the news. The doctor informed him that Samantha had suffered a concussion and a broken arm, but her injuries weren't life-threatening. The baby, miraculously, had only minor bruises. Relief washed over Ethan, but it was short-lived. The doctor's next words brought him crashing back to reality. "Ms. Johnson is asking about her living situation. She's concerned about being discharged with nowhere to go." Ethan's stomach churned with guilt. He hadn't considered the full extent of Samantha's circumstances. Without thinking, he blurted out, "I'll take care of it. Can I see her?" The doctor led Ethan to Samantha's room. As he entered, he saw her lying in the hospital bed, her arm in a cast and her face bruised. The baby slept peacefully in a small crib beside her. Samantha's eyes widened with recognition and fear as Ethan approached. "I'm Ethan Miller," he began, his voice low and cautious. "I'm the one who... I'm so sorry for what happened." Samantha regarded him warily. "You're the driver," she stated flatly. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to help you," he said. "Both of you. I'll cover all the medical expenses, of course, but I'd also like to provide you with a place to stay once you're discharged." Samantha's expression shifted from wariness to disbelief. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "Because it's the right thing to do," Ethan replied simply. "I made a terrible mistake, and I want to make it right." Samantha remained silent for a long moment, her gaze shifting between Ethan and her sleeping child. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't need your charity." Ethan could sense her pride battling with her desperate situation. "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's my responsibility. Please, let me help." After more discussion and gentle persuasion, Samantha reluctantly agreed to accept Ethan's offer of temporary accommodation. Ethan left the hospital feeling a mix of relief and determination. He had taken the first step, but he knew there was much more to be done. The next day, Ethan arranged for Samantha and her baby to be moved to a high-end hotel suite upon their discharge. He hired a team of nurses to assist with their care and made sure they had everything they needed. As he oversaw the arrangements, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. That evening, Ethan met with his longtime friend and business associate Michael at a quiet bar. As they sat in a secluded booth, Ethan recounted the events of the past 2 days. Michael listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. When Ethan finished, Michael leaned back in his seat. "So, what's your plan now?" he asked. Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But I know I can't just write a check and walk away. This feels different." Michael studied his friend closely. "I've known you for years, Ethan. I've never seen you like this. What's really going on?" Ethan struggled to find the words. "When I saw Samantha and her baby in that hospital room, it hit me. All my wealth, all my success. What does it really mean if I can't use it to make a real difference?" Michael nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "You're talking about more than just helping this one family, aren't you?" "I think I am," Ethan replied, a new sense of purpose filling his voice. "I want to do something meaningful, something that could change lives, not just for Samantha and her child, but for others like them." As the conversation continued late into the night, Ethan's vision began to take shape. He talked about creating a sanctuary for homeless families, a place that would provide not just shelter, but opportunities for education, job training, and personal growth. Michael listened, offering advice and asking tough questions. By the time they left the bar, Ethan's mind was made up. He would use his resources and influence to create something unprecedented, a haven that would challenge society's perceptions of wealth, poverty, and social responsibility. As Ethan drove home that night, he felt a sense of clarity and purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The accident that had seemed like a disaster was transforming into an opportunity, a chance to redefine his life's work and leave a lasting impact on the world. Little did Ethan know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would test his resolve, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately lead to a transformation far beyond anything he could have imagined. In the weeks following his decision, Ethan threw himself into researching homelessness and innovative solutions. He spent hours poring over reports, consulting with experts, and visiting existing shelters. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that a new approach was needed. One morning, Ethan called a meeting with his executive team. As they gathered in the sleek conference room of his company's headquarters, he could sense their curiosity and apprehension. Ethan rarely called such impromptu meetings. "I've brought you here today to discuss a new project," Ethan began, his voice firm and determined. "We're going to build a shelter for homeless families. But not just any shelter. This will be a comprehensive facility that addresses the root causes of homelessness." The room fell silent. Ethan's CFO, Karen, was the first to speak up. "Ethan, while I admire your intention, this is quite far from our core business. Have you considered the financial implications?" Ethan nodded, having anticipated this question. "I have. I'm prepared to fund this project personally, but I want our company's expertise behind it. Think of it as a corporate social responsibility initiative on steroids." He proceeded to outline his vision, a state-of-the-art facility offering not just beds and meals, but also job training programs, healthcare services, childcare, and education support. The shelter would be designed to help families transition from homelessness to self-sufficiency. As Ethan spoke, he could see the skepticism on some faces gradually give way to interest and even excitement. His COO, James, leaned forward. "This is ambitious, Ethan, but if we pull it off, it could revolutionize how we approach homelessness." The meeting lasted for hours as they debated logistics, budgets, and potential challenges. By the end, Ethan had secured cautious support from his team. They agreed to form a task force to develop a detailed plan for the shelter. That evening, Ethan visited Samantha and her baby at the hotel. Over the past weeks, he had been checking in regularly, ensuring they had everything they needed. As he entered the suite, he found Samantha sketching in a notebook while her baby napped. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked, noting the cast on her arm had been removed. Samantha looked up, a small smile on her face. "Better, thank you. The physical therapy is helping." Ethan sat down, his excitement about the shelter project bubbling over. "I wanted to share something with you," he said, and began to explain his idea for the shelter. As he spoke, Samantha's expression changed from polite interest to genuine engagement. When Ethan finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "It sounds amazing, but why are you doing this?" Ethan considered her question carefully. "Because of you," he said finally. "Meeting you and your baby, seeing your struggle, it made me realize I have the power to do more, to be more." Samantha's eyes welled with tears. "I never thought our accident would lead to this," she said softly. Encouraged by her response, Ethan continued, "Actually, I was hoping you might be willing to help. Your perspective would be invaluable in making sure we create something that truly meets the needs of the people we're trying to help." Samantha hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'd like that," she said. "It's been a long time since I felt like I had something meaningful to contribute." As they continued to talk, Samantha revealed more about her past. She had been an art student, full of promise, before a series of personal tragedies left her homeless. Her story only reinforced Ethan's determination to make the shelter a reality. The next day, Ethan was confronted by his parents at their weekly family dinner. His mother, a socialite known for her charity galas, was the first to broach the subject. "Ethan, darling," she began, her voice dripping with forced sweetness, "we've heard rumors about this shelter project of yours. Surely you can't be serious." Ethan set down his fork, meeting his mother's gaze steadily. "I'm completely serious, Mother. This is important to me." His father, a stern-faced man who had built their family fortune, scoffed. "Important? It's a waste of money and resources. You're a businessman, not a social worker." "I'm both," Ethan replied firmly. "And I believe this project will not only help people but also inspire other businesses to take social responsibility seriously." The argument escalated, with his parents accusing him of tarnishing the family name and squandering his inheritance. Ethan stood his ground, eventually leaving the dinner early, his resolve stronger than ever. As he drove home, Ethan reflected on the challenges ahead. He knew opposition would come from many quarters: his family, his peers, perhaps even the community where he planned to build the shelter. But he also thought of Samantha, of her baby, and of countless others like them. With renewed determination, he vowed to see this through, no matter the obstacles. The shelter project was no longer just an idea. It was a mission, a chance to redefine success and make a lasting impact on society. And Ethan was ready for the fight ahead. As Ethan's vision for the shelter began to take shape, he realized he needed a dedicated team to bring it to life. He started by reaching out to his network, seeking individuals with experience in social work, urban planning, and community outreach. During this search, Ethan came across Sarah Thompson's profile. Sarah was a former police officer who had left the force to pursue a career in community advocacy. Her unique background and reputation for building trust in underprivileged neighborhoods caught Ethan's attention. Ethan arranged a meeting with Sarah at a local coffee shop. As she walked in, he was struck by her confident demeanor and keen, observant eyes. After brief introductions, Ethan dove into explaining his shelter project. "I'm impressed by the scope of your vision," Sarah said when he finished. "But I have to ask, why you? What makes a billionaire suddenly care about the homeless?" Ethan appreciated her directness. He shared the story of the accident with Samantha, his subsequent soul-searching, and his determination to make a difference. As he spoke, he could see Sarah's skepticism gradually soften. "All right," Sarah said after a long pause. "I'm interested. But I need to know that this isn't just some vanity project for you. These are real lives we'd be dealing with." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I understand. That's exactly why I want you on board. Your experience and perspective are crucial to making this work." After further discussion, Sarah agreed to join the project as the head of community relations and security planning. Her first suggestion was to involve Samantha more deeply in the planning process. "If we're serious about creating something that truly serves the community, we need input from people who've lived the experience," Sarah explained. Ethan agreed, and together they approached Samantha with the idea of joining the team as a consultant. Samantha was hesitant at first, doubting her qualifications, but Sarah's encouragement and Ethan's assurance of the value of her perspective eventually convinced her. As the core team began to work together, a dynamic started to form. Ethan brought his business acumen and resources. Sarah contributed her practical knowledge of community needs and security concerns, and Samantha offered invaluable insights into the day-to-day challenges faced by homeless individuals. One afternoon, as they were discussing the shelter's design, Samantha suggested incorporating an art therapy program. "Art was my lifeline when I was on the streets," she explained. "It gave me a sense of purpose and self-worth. I think it could help others too." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great idea. We could even showcase the artwork in the community, help change perceptions about homelessness." Ethan watched this exchange with a sense of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of collaborative thinking he had hoped for when assembling the team. As the project progressed, Sarah proposed organizing a community meeting to present their plans and gather feedback. "We need to be transparent about our intentions," she argued. "If we want the community's support, we have to involve them from the start." Ethan and Samantha agreed, and they set about planning the event. They secured a local community center and sent out invitations to residents, business owners, and local officials. On the day of the meeting, the team arrived early to set up. As people began to file in, Ethan felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was the first real test of their project's reception. Sarah took the lead in presenting their plans, her experience in community engagement evident in her clear and empathetic communication style. Ethan spoke about the financial aspects and long-term sustainability of the project, while Samantha shared her personal story and the potential impact of the shelter. The initial response was mixed. Some attendees expressed enthusiasm for the project, seeing it as a much-needed resource for the community. Others, however, voiced concerns about potential increases in crime and decreased property values. One particularly vocal opponent, a local business owner named Frank, stood up. "This is all very nice in theory," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But have you considered what this will do to our neighborhood? We don't need more homeless people hanging around." The room tensed at Frank's words. Ethan was about to respond when Samantha stepped forward. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice steady. "I was one of those homeless people you're worried about. But this shelter isn't about bringing more homeless to your neighborhood. It's about giving people like me a chance to get back on our feet, to contribute to the community." Her words seemed to resonate with many in the room. Even Frank appeared taken aback, his hostility deflating slightly. As the meeting concluded, Sarah, Ethan, and Samantha huddled together. "That was intense," Ethan said, "but I think we made some progress." Sarah nodded. "We've got a long way to go, but this is a start. We've planted the seed. Now we need to nurture it." As they left the community center, the team felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had faced their first real challenge together and come out stronger. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face it as a united front. As the shelter project gained momentum, it also began to attract more attention, not all of it positive. Ethan's rival in the business world, Victor Chambers, saw an opportunity to undermine Ethan's reputation and potentially gain an advantage in their ongoing corporate competition. One morning, Ethan woke up to find his face splashed across the front page of a major newspaper. The headline read, "Billionaire's Shelter, Philanthropy or PR Stunt?" The article, clearly influenced by Victor, questioned Ethan's motives and suggested that the shelter was nothing more than a tax write-off and an attempt to improve his public image. Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his PR team, board members, and concerned friends. He felt a knot forming in his stomach as he realized the uphill battle he now faced. At the project office, Sarah and Samantha were already discussing the article when Ethan arrived. "This is bad," Sarah said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Public perception is crucial for a project like this. If people think it's just a PR stunt, we'll lose community support." Samantha nodded in agreement. "We need to respond, but how?" Ethan sighed heavily. "I could issue a statement, try to explain my real motives, but would anyone believe it?" As they debated their next move, reports started coming in of increased criminal activity in the neighborhood where they planned to build the shelter. There had been a spike in drug-related incidents and petty theft. Sarah, with her background in law enforcement, was particularly troubled by this development. "This isn't a coincidence," she said. "Someone's stirring up trouble to turn the community against us." The team spent days strategizing how to address these challenges. Ethan wanted to push forward aggressively to fight back against what he saw as Victor's underhanded tactics. Sarah advocated for a more measured approach, focusing on community outreach and transparency. Samantha found herself caught in the middle, seeing merit in both perspectives. The stress began to take its toll on all of them. Ethan grew short-tempered, snapping at his staff over minor issues. Sarah spent long hours poring over crime reports, trying to find a pattern that could help them address the security concerns. Samantha, feeling out of her depth in these high-stakes conflicts, began to withdraw, spending more time working on the art therapy program plans in solitude. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about how to proceed, Ethan found himself alone in the project office. He stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, questioning whether he had made a terrible mistake. Was he really equipped to take on a project of this magnitude? Was he doing more harm than good? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Samantha, who had come back to retrieve some sketches she'd left behind. Seeing Ethan's troubled expression, she approached him cautiously. "You know," she began, her voice soft but firm, When I was on the streets, I used to look at buildings like this and imagine the people inside. I'd wonder if they ever thought about people like me, if they cared at all. Now I'm here, watching you fight so hard for this project, and I realize that sometimes caring is the hardest part." Ethan turned to her, surprised by her insight. "I just don't know if I'm the right person for this," he admitted. "Maybe Victor's right. Maybe I'm just fooling myself." Samantha shook her head. "The Ethan Miller I've come to know over these past months isn't a fool or a fraud. He's someone who saw a problem and decided to do something about it, even when it was difficult. Especially when it was difficult." Her words struck a chord with Ethan. He realized that in his determination to prove his critics wrong, he had lost sight of why he started this project in the first place. The next day, Ethan called a team meeting. "I owe you all an apology," he began. "I've been so focused on fighting our opposition that I forgot what we're really here to do. This isn't about me, or Victor, or anyone else. It's about the people we're trying to help." Sarah and Samantha exchanged surprised glances. This was a side of Ethan they hadn't seen before. "So," Ethan continued, "I think it's time we changed our approach. Instead of reacting to every attack, we're going to focus on our work. We'll be transparent. We'll address concerns as they come up. But we won't let ourselves get distracted from our goal." The team nodded in agreement, a renewed sense of purpose filling the room. As they dispersed to their tasks, Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew the challenges ahead were still formidable, but for the first time in weeks, he felt truly confident that they were on the right path. Little did they know, the true test of their resolve was yet to come. The conflicts they had faced so far were just the beginning, and the coming weeks would push them to their limits in ways they couldn't have imagined. As Ethan and his team refocused their efforts on the shelter project, a gradual but noticeable shift began to occur. Their dedication and transparency started to win over skeptics in the community. Local news outlets, intrigued by the controversy surrounding the project, began to dig deeper into the story. One ambitious reporter, Jessica Chen, spent a week shadowing the team. Her resulting series of articles painted a nuanced picture of the project, highlighting both the challenges and the potential impact. The public's perception began to change, with more people expressing support for the initiative. This positive attention brought an unexpected windfall. New volunteers and donations started pouring in. Local businesses offered supplies and services. College students volunteered their time. Even some of Ethan's wealthy peers, impressed by his commitment, began to contribute. Samantha's art therapy program became a cornerstone of the shelter's offerings. As construction of the physical building progressed, she began running pilot sessions in a temporary space. The impact was immediate and profound. Participants found solace and self-expression through art, and their works began to tell powerful stories of struggle and hope. One day, as Samantha was setting up for a session, a young woman named Maria approached her. "I saw the flyer for this program," Maria said hesitantly. I'm not homeless, but I'm close. Can I still join?" Samantha welcomed her warmly, and Maria became a regular attendee. Her story, a single mother working 2 jobs but still struggling to make ends meet, highlighted the precarious situation many in the community faced. Inspired by Maria and others like her, Samantha worked with Ethan and Sarah to expand the shelter's services. They developed programs for job training, financial literacy, and affordable housing assistance, aiming to prevent homelessness before it occurred. As the project evolved, so did its leaders. Ethan, once solely focused on the business world, found himself deeply engaged in social issues. He began using his influence to advocate for policy changes to address systemic causes of homelessness. Sarah's approach to security shifted as well. Instead of focusing solely on preventing crime, she developed community-based safety initiatives that fostered trust and cooperation between shelter residents and the surrounding neighborhood. Samantha, gaining confidence in her abilities, took on a larger role in the project's management. She became a powerful spokesperson, her personal experiences lending credibility and emotional weight to their message. The team's growing prominence attracted media attention. They were invited to participate in interviews and panel discussions. At first, Ethan took the lead in these appearances, but he soon realized the power of Samantha's voice. During one televised interview, the host asked about the project's impact. Ethan began to answer with statistics and projections, but then he paused and turned to Samantha. "Actually," he said, "I think Samantha can speak to this better than I can." Samantha, though nervous, rose to the occasion. She spoke eloquently about her journey from homelessness to becoming a key figure in the project. "This shelter isn't just about providing a roof," she explained. "It's about restoring dignity, about giving people the tools and the confidence to rebuild their lives." Her words resonated deeply with viewers. Social media buzzed with clips from the interview, and donations to the project spiked. As the shelter neared completion, the team organized an open house for the community. The event was a testament to how far they had come. The modern, welcoming facility was a far cry from traditional shelters. Art created by program participants adorned the walls. Stations were set up to showcase the various services offered. Local officials, once skeptical, now praised the initiative. Even Frank, the business owner who had been so vocal in his opposition at the first community meeting, approached Ethan during the event. "I've got to hand it to you," Frank said, shaking Ethan's hand. "I thought this would be a disaster for the neighborhood, but I was wrong. You're really making a difference here." As Ethan looked around the room, at Sarah discussing safety measures with community members, at Samantha guiding visitors through an impromptu art session, at former shelter residents now employed as staff, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This project had transformed not just the lives of those it served, but also the lives of those who created it. Ethan realized he was no longer the same person who had accidentally hit Samantha that rainy night. He had found a new purpose, a new understanding of his role in the world. As the open house wound down, Ethan gathered his team. "We've come a long way," he said, "but this is just the beginning. We've shown what's possible. Now, let's see how much further we can go." The shelter was no longer just a building or a program. It had become a model for change, a beacon of hope in the community. And for Ethan, Samantha, and Sarah, it was the start of a new chapter in their lives, one filled with purpose, challenge, and the promise of making a real difference in the world. Despite the shelter's initial success and growing community support, new challenges emerged that threatened to unravel everything Ethan, Samantha, and Sarah had built. The first blow came from Ethan's family. His parents, long disapproving of his charitable endeavor, decided to take more drastic action. One evening, as Ethan was leaving the shelter after a long day of work, he received a call from his father. "Ethan," his father's voice was cold and businesslike, "this has gone on long enough. Your mother and I have decided that if you don't abandon this shelter project and return to running the company properly, we'll be forced to cut off your access to the family trust." Ethan was stunned. While he had been using his own money for the shelter, the threat of losing access to the family's vast resources was significant. It could impact not just the shelter, but his other business ventures as well. "You can't be serious," Ethan replied, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. "We're deadly serious," his father retorted. "You have 48 hours to make your decision." As Ethan grappled with this ultimatum, Sarah was facing her own crisis. Her law enforcement contacts had alerted her to a disturbing trend. Someone was actively trying to sabotage the shelter from within. Small amounts of drugs had been found on the premises, planted to create the impression that the shelter was fostering criminal activity. False complaints were being filed, and rumors were being spread to discourage people from seeking help at the shelter. Sarah's investigation led her to a startling discovery. The saboteur was connected to Victor Chambers, Ethan's business rival. Victor, it seemed, was still determined to see the shelter project fail. Meanwhile, Samantha faced a ghost from her past. An old acquaintance from her days on the street, a man named Derek, had resurfaced. Derek had once been Samantha's boyfriend and partner in petty crime, a relationship she had worked hard to leave behind. Derek cornered Samantha one day as she was leaving the shelter. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look at you all cleaned up and playing helper. You think you're better than us now?" Samantha stood her ground. "What do you want, Derek?" "I want you to remember where you came from," Derek replied. "You're not cut out for this do-gooder life. You're a street rat, just like me. Always will be." His words shook Samantha more than she cared to admit. She had worked hard to build a new life, but Derek's presence brought back painful memories and self-doubt. As these individual conflicts escalated, they began to affect the team's dynamic. Ethan, preoccupied with his family's ultimatum, became distant and short-tempered. Sarah, consumed by her investigation into the sabotage, grew paranoid and distrustful. Samantha, wrestling with her past, withdrew into herself, spending less time at the shelter and more time alone with her art. The strain began to show in their work. Small disagreements turned into heated arguments. Decision-making became a fraught process, with each team member second-guessing the others. One particularly tense meeting ended with Ethan storming out after a disagreement with Sarah over security measures. As the door slammed behind him, Sarah turned to Samantha. "What's gotten into him lately?" she demanded. Samantha, already on edge from her encounter with Derek, snapped back. "Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your investigation, you'd notice that we're all struggling here." The outburst left both women shocked and hurt. As they stood in uncomfortable silence, the reality of their situation sank in. The external pressures were tearing their once solid team apart. As news of the internal strife spread, morale at the shelter plummeted. Volunteers began to drop out, and some of the residents started to question whether they should look for help elsewhere. The situation came to a head one rainy evening, eerily reminiscent of the night Ethan had first encountered Samantha. The team had gathered for an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. As they sat around the table, the weight of their challenges hung heavy in the air. Ethan looked at his watch, acutely aware that his 48-hour deadline from his parents was nearly up. Sarah's eyes darted suspiciously around the room, wondering if the saboteur might be among them. Samantha sketched absently on a notepad, Derek's words echoing in her mind. The shelter, which had once been a symbol of hope and transformation, now seemed to be on the brink of collapse. As they faced each other across the table, each of them wondered silently. Had they taken on more than they could handle? Was this the end of their shared dream? Little did they know, this moment of crisis would be the catalyst for their greatest challenge yet, and potentially their most significant triumph. The tension in the emergency meeting was palpable. Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha sat in silence, each wrestling with their own demons. The sound of rain pelting against the windows seemed to underscore the gravity of their situation. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "I have something to tell you both," he began, his voice heavy. He explained his parents' ultimatum, laying bare the financial threat to the shelter. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" she demanded. Before Ethan could respond, Sarah launched into her own revelation. She detailed her investigation into the sabotage, her voice growing more heated as she described Victor's involvement. Samantha listened, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. When Sarah finished, Samantha took a deep breath and shared her own struggle, Derek's reappearance and the doubts it had awakened in her. As the truth of their individual battles came to light, a heavy silence fell over the room. The magnitude of their combined challenges seemed insurmountable. Suddenly, a commotion outside broke their contemplation. They rushed to the window to see a group of protesters gathered in front of the shelter, their angry voices audible even through the closed windows. Signs bearing slogans like "No drugs in our neighborhood" and "Shelter brings crime" were visible in the rain-soaked night. "It's all falling apart," Samantha whispered, her voice breaking. As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed with a news alert. He read it aloud, his face paling. Local shelter linked to rising crime rates. Community outrage grows. The fabricated story, clearly planted by Victor's people, was spreading like wildfire across social media. Within minutes, more protesters began to arrive, their angry chants growing louder. Sarah's phone rang. It was the police. There had been reports of a disturbance, and they were on their way. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice tight. "If this escalates, we could lose everything." The three looked at each other, the weight of their failure pressing down on them. Ethan's shoulders slumped as he turned away from the window. "Maybe my parents were right," he said quietly. "Maybe I was fooling myself, thinking I could make a difference." Sarah shook her head, her earlier anger replaced by defeat. "I should have seen this coming. I'm supposed to protect this place, and I failed." Samantha remained silent, her gaze fixed on the growing crowd outside. In that moment of crisis, with everything they had worked for on the brink of collapse, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me," came a timid voice from the doorway. They turned to see Maria, the young mother who had been one of the first participants in Samantha's art therapy program. She stood there, clutching a piece of paper, her eyes wide with concern. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Maria continued, her voice gaining strength, "but I saw the protesters outside, and I couldn't just stand by. I wanted to show you something." She held up the paper. It was a drawing she had made in one of Samantha's classes. The image showed a group of diverse people standing together, surrounded by the shelter's walls. At the top, in colorful letters, were the words, "My new family." "This shelter, this program, it saved my life," Maria said, her eyes brimming with tears. "It gave me hope when I had none, and I know I'm not the only one. There are dozens of us out there who want to tell our stories, who want to fight for this place." Her words hung in the air, a powerful reminder of why they had started this journey in the first place. Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha looked at each other, a spark of their old determination reigniting. Samantha was the first to move. She walked over to Maria and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for reminding us what really matters." Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another hour had passed, bringing him closer to his parents' deadline. But as he looked at Maria's drawing, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The money, the family name, none of it mattered compared to the lives they were changing. Sarah, inspired by Maria's courage, began formulating a plan. "We need to get ahead of this," she said, her strategic mind kicking into gear. "We need to show the community the real impact of this shelter." As they huddled together, brainstorming ways to turn this crisis into an opportunity, the sound of sirens approached. The police had arrived, and with them, the moment that would define the future of the shelter. The team shared a look of determination. They had come too far to give up now. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The crisis had brought them to the brink, but it had also reminded them of the power of their shared vision. As they prepared to face the chaos outside, they knew that this night would either be the end of their dream or the beginning of something even greater than they had imagined. As the police sirens grew louder, Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha knew they had to act fast. Inspired by Maria's reminder of their mission, they quickly formulated a plan. "We need to show the real face of this shelter," Ethan said, his voice filled with renewed determination. Not the lies being spread, but the actual lives were changing. Sarah nodded in agreement. I'll talk to the police. Try to keep things calm outside. Ethan, you handle the media. Samantha, gather as many shelter residents and success stories as you can. They moved into action just as the first police cars pulled up outside. Sarah strode out to meet the officers, her past experience as a cop evident in her confident demeanor. She quickly briefed them on the situation, emphasizing the peaceful nature of the shelter and the fabricated nature of the recent allegations. Meanwhile, Ethan stepped out to face the protesters and the media that had begun to gather. Camera lights flashed as he raised his hands, calling for attention. I know there are concerns and rumors flying around, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. But I ask you all for a few minutes of your time. There's something you need to see. As Ethan spoke, Samantha was inside, rallying the shelter residents. This is our home, she told them, and it's time to show everyone what that really means. One by one, residents stepped forward, ready to share their stories. Maria was among the first, clutching her drawing and standing tall, despite her nervousness. Back outside, the crowd's angry chants had subsided into curious murmurs as Ethan continued to speak. This shelter isn't just a building, he said. It's a community. It's a place of transformation. And don't take my word for it. Let the people whose lives have been changed tell you themselves. On cue, Samantha emerged from the shelter, leading a group of residents. They formed a line behind Ethan, facing the crowd and cameras. The sight of so many individuals, men, women, families with children, standing proudly in support of the shelter, created a powerful image. Maria stepped forward first, her voice shaky but determined as she shared her story. She held up her drawing for the cameras, explaining how the shelter had given her not just a roof, but a future. Others followed. A former addict who was now 6 months sober and employed, a family that had been living in their car before finding stability at the shelter, an elderly man who had rediscovered his passion for teaching by tutoring younger residents. As the stories unfolded, the mood of the crowd began to shift. Anger gave way to empathy, skepticism to understanding. Even some of the protesters lowered their signs, moved by the genuine emotion in the residents' words. Watching from the sidelines, Sarah saw an opportunity. She approached Frank, the business owner who had once been their vocal opponent, but had come around to support the shelter. Frank, she said urgently, we need your help. Can you speak about how the shelter has impacted the neighborhood? Frank nodded, stepping forward to take the microphone from Ethan. I'll admit, I was wrong about this place, he said, his gruff voice carrying across the now quiet crowd. I thought it would bring trouble, but it's brought nothing but positive change. My business is doing better than ever, and I sleep better at night knowing my community is taking care of its own. As Frank spoke, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his father. We saw the news. We need to talk. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. The tide was turning. The media, sensing a shift in the story, began asking different questions. Instead of focusing on the allegations of crime, they wanted to know more about the shelter's programs, its success rates, its plans for the future. Samantha found herself in front of a camera, passionately describing the art therapy program and its impact. As she spoke, she caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Derek. He stood at the back, his expression unreadable. But as Samantha continued to speak, articulating her journey from the streets to her current role, she saw something change in Derek's eyes. Was it respect? Regret? Whatever it was, Samantha felt the last of her self-doubt melt away. As the night wore on, the protest dwindled and dispersed. In its place, a crowd of supporters began to form. People from the neighborhood, moved by the stories they'd heard, came forward to offer help, donations, volunteer hours, professional services. By dawn, the crisis had transformed into an opportunity. The shelter, which had been on the brink of collapse just hours before, was now the center of a community mobilization. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha stood together, exhausted but exhilarated. "We did it," Sarah said, a note of wonder in her voice. "No," Ethan corrected her, looking out at the bustling scene of volunteers and supporters. "We're just getting started." Samantha nodded in agreement, a smile playing on her lips. "So, what's our next move?" As they began to discuss their plans, all three felt a renewed sense of purpose. The crisis had tested them, pushed them to their limits, but it had also revealed the true strength of their vision. They had not just survived the night, they had emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to make a lasting difference in their community. In the weeks following the crisis, the shelter experienced a surge of support and positive attention. Donations poured in, volunteers signed up in droves, and the media coverage shifted dramatically in their favor. Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha were busier than ever, working to capitalize on this newfound goodwill and expand their programs. One sunny afternoon, as they were preparing for a press conference to announce new initiatives, an unexpected visitor arrived at the shelter. A well-dressed man in his 60s introduced himself as James Hardwick, a lawyer representing the estate of the late Elizabeth Thornton. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Samantha said, confused. "Who is Elizabeth Thornton?" James smiled kindly. "Miss Johnson, Elizabeth Thornton was your grandmother." The room fell silent. Samantha stared at the lawyer in disbelief. "That's impossible," she finally managed to say. "I never knew my grandmother. I grew up in the foster system. I'm afraid there's been a terrible mistake," James explained. "Your grandmother had been searching for you for years. She passed away 6 months ago, but not before ensuring that her estate would find you." As James continued to explain, the full picture emerged. Due to a clerical error years ago, Samantha had been mistakenly classified as an orphan and placed in foster care. Her grandmother, unaware of this mistake, had spent years trying to locate her missing granddaughter. "Ms. Johnson," James said, his voice solemn, "I'm here to inform you that as Elizabeth Thornton's sole heir, you have inherited her entire estate. The total value is approximately $50 million. The news hit like a thunderbolt. Ethan and Sarah watched in stunned silence as Samantha tried to process this life-altering information. This can't be real," Samantha whispered, her hands shaking. James produced a folder filled with documents, birth certificates, legal papers, and old family photographs. As Samantha looked through them, tears welling in her eyes, the truth became undeniable. "There's more," James added. "Your grandmother left a letter for you." He handed Samantha an envelope, which she opened with trembling fingers. As she read the letter, Samantha's expression shifted from shock to deep emotion. Her grandmother's words spoke of love, regret for the years lost, and hope that Samantha would use her inheritance to make a difference in the world. The implications of this revelation were enormous. Samantha, who had once been homeless, was now a wealthy woman. The dynamic of the team and the shelter project had suddenly, dramatically changed. As the initial shock wore off, the team gathered to discuss what this meant for their future. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "Samantha," he said carefully, "this is incredible news, but I want you to know that it doesn't change anything about your place here. This project is as much yours as it is mine or Sarah's." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We're a team. Your newfound wealth doesn't change that." Samantha looked at her friends, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "But this does change things. It changes everything, in the best possible way." Over the next few hours, as they postponed the press conference to deal with this new development, Samantha shared her vision. She wanted to use her inheritance to expand their work, to create a network of shelters, and support programs across the city, even the country. My grandmother's letter said she hoped I'd make a difference, Samantha explained. This is how I want to honor her memory. By taking what we've built here and making it bigger than we ever imagined. Ethan and Sarah listened, their excitement growing with each idea Samantha proposed. They began to plan. Their collective experience, Ethan's business acumen, Sarah's community knowledge, and Samantha's first-hand understanding of homelessness, combining with this unexpected windfall to create a powerful force for change. As word of Samantha's inheritance spread, it added a new layer to their story. The media latched onto the rags to riches narrative, but Samantha was quick to redirect the focus to their mission. In interviews, she emphasized how her experiences, both in homelessness and now in wealth, had shown her the arbitrary nature of financial status. Money doesn't define a person's worth, she would say. What defines us is how we treat each other, how we build our communities. The shelter, once a small local project, was now poised to become a model for a new approach to addressing homelessness and poverty. Samantha's inheritance provided not just financial resources, but also a powerful story that captured people's imaginations and opened doors that had previously been closed. Ethan found that his parents, impressed by the project's success and the positive publicity, withdrew their ultimatum. Victor Chambers, seeing the tide of public opinion, quietly ceased his opposition. As they prepared to announce their expanded plans to the public, Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha took a moment to reflect on their journey. From a chance accident on a rainy night to this moment of transformative possibility, they had come further than any of them could have imagined. Ready to change the world? Ethan asked, a smile on his face. Sarah and Samantha nodded, their eyes shining with determination and hope. As they stepped out to face the cameras and share their vision for the future, they knew that this was more than just a plot twist in their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for them, but for countless others whose lives they were now poised to touch. The shelter, born from an accident and built through struggle and determination, was about to become a beacon of hope on a scale they had never dreamed possible. And Ethan, Sarah, and Samantha were ready to lead the way into this bright, unexpected future. The doubt that Derek had planted in her mind bloomed fully. Perhaps she didn't belong here after all. Perhaps she was, as Derek said, just playing at being something she wasn't. As the situation outside deteriorated, the team's resolve crumbled. Ethan paced the room, muttering about damage control and PR strategies. Sarah was on the phone with her police contacts, trying to mitigate the potential fallout. Samantha stood frozen, overwhelmed by the chaos.